Hi, everyone. This is the acyuta-bhava from Nightlight Astrology. It is Wednesday, February 26th, and today we're going to talk about Venus's upcoming square to Pluto. Now, this is a square that's perfecting by Friday. Let me give you a look at it before we dive into talking about it. So, Venus, of course, currently in the sign of Aries, and making a square to Pluto in the sign of Capricorn. Here you can see Pluto in Cap, and here's Venus in Aries, and we're going to connect the two of them right here so you can see. Now, Venus right now is within a 3-degree range in ancient astrology. A period of 3 degrees before and after was considered when looking at degree-based aspects. And so Venus is engaging in this square with Pluto right now. And so we're all, the effects are sort of close at hand, but we're going to see these effects go on through the weekend and early into, like, say, Monday, even Tuesday, as Venus separates. So you have maybe about a little less than a week right now of looking at Venus's square to Pluto and noticing it in your daily life. A couple other things that are important to note with this transit: Venus is, of course, in Aries, which means its host is Mars, who is currently also exalted in the sign of Capricorn. So there is good reception right now between Venus and Mars, which can mute some of the difficulties of Venus being sort of out of her element in Mars's sign. But for the most part, that level of technical details, I'll explain some basic ways of thinking about it today, but we don't need to fuss over it too much. You might especially experience the tension of Venus and Pluto in the next 24 hours, in the next day or two, and then Friday really intensely, because the moon is also in Aries right now and is going to pick up the square to Pluto and transfer the light between Venus and Pluto, sort of warming us up for Friday. And that's going to happen tomorrow. So if I go forward about a day, you're going to see the moon coming through tomorrow afternoon, Thursday, hitting Venus and then moving right into the square with Pluto. So, the next couple of days between now and Friday, the moon's heating up the aspect, then Venus makes the aspect. So this is definitely going to intensify between now and, say, Friday evening. All right, so what does all this mean? Well, I have a lot of different notes written down today that I wanted to share with you guys, because this transit, there's a number of different ways that you can think about it and approach it. And I think a couple of different simple ways of thinking about the archetypal combination of themes and what you might expect. First of all, let's say that this is a Venus who wants to take action. Because Venus is in Mars's sign, Venus is going to be hosted by the Mars energy right now, which means it's more of an inceptional Venus. Inceptional meaning wanting to start things and wanting to do things and take action. This is a cardinal sign that Venus is in, which also means that we can face, especially when there are aspects from Venus to other planets and hard aspects, moments of tension or difficulty where we are starting to clarify something or eliminate something, or but usually whatever's happening, whatever tension is there, is going to lead to Venus wanting to do or act in a way that's more dramatic and sudden and sort of cathartic. That's Venus in the cardinal sign of Aries. Now, I don't often, well, okay, before I go into this, actually, I should say that because Mars is exalted, these actions can be very effective. It can be very powerful and strong and successful. It can also be, a little, what do you want to say, like ruthless. Venus in Mars's sign with Mars exalted has that feeling of, like, if I have to ram through something, and it doesn't really, it may hurt something or destroy something or be a little destructive in the process, I may not care so long as it gets the job done. So we do have to be careful of just a little bit of that extra tenacious Mars and Capricorn energy, which can be so helpful and productive and practical and like that, but sometimes a little unconcerned with consequences or hurt feelings, or maybe a little too detached and callous. So you do have to watch for that. Now, a couple of other things to keep in mind when Venus is squaring Pluto, generally speaking. Venus is going to go through a period of catharsis, purgation, intensification, with the Mars themes as an undercurrent, because what Pluto does is Pluto intensifies. Um, Pluto is explosive. Pluto brings things up like it's like popping a zit. It's like the pressure of something that's sort of cooking below the surface. It just has to explode. It's really gross. But at any rate, you can think of it like, or another way of thinking about it. So explosion, catharsis, purgation, like a volcano blowing up. But you can also think about it. Here's another nasty visual. You go down to the fridge and you open up the refrigerator and something smells really bad and you realize that something has passed its expiration has passed its expiration date in the fridge. You have to pull it out and throw it away. So the thing, elimination, purgation, removing something that is festering or that has made its rottenness felt and known. And it can be really simple, just simple taking out the trash with some of our personal unconscious issues in any area of our life, but especially any of the following areas. With Venus, you're always going to be concerned about relationships, love, sexuality. Sometimes it's things like our wardrobe or our relation to our body and self-esteem and image, style. And sometimes it's like, we've been maybe doing something, or sometimes it's like a supplement that you're taking with Venus, or it's a dietary, something you've been having in your diet, and suddenly you're just like, ooh, this is a bad habit. I got to get rid of it. Venus, as a planet that represents hygiene and cleanliness, can also, when it hits Pluto, be about sort of the elimination of something that's dirty, ugly, impure, unclean. And you gotta be careful because you can get a little obsessive about that too. Like people who sometimes are going to, with Venus Pluto, are going to want to try to eliminate everything that's dirty, but there may be some way in which you're really critical or hard or puritanical and judgmental and hard on yourself or other people. Impurities exist. They're part of life, right? And we know too that what looks like an impurity is oftentimes fertilizer for something new. We need a little bit of poop in a garden, right? So Venus Pluto is sometimes about that fine line between eliminating something that's toxic or heavy or impure, unclean or ugly and not beautiful, and on the other hand, the need to incorporate or allow for something that feels a little tainted to teach us, to work on us. Sometimes there's something that's ugly about a friend or a coworker or some element of ourselves, and it's not easy to eliminate. It's something that takes, if there's something that needs to be corrected, sometimes it takes a lot of time and patience and mercy and forgiveness and grace. And this can be a moment of forgiveness, as well as that potential to get the will or the courage or the strength to take action and eliminate something, maybe forgiving something and allowing for something to just be a little imperfect. So those are different Venus Pluto tensions that can come up, but Venus Pluto will create that catharsis and intensification around romance, love, beauty, sexuality, friendships, the topics of women, sisters, friends. So wherever there's harmony or there are agreements, or there has been a long-standing, like a treaty or something like that, where it can be thrown into question or challenged or eliminated or something like that. You've had a long-standing agreement with somebody and you say, you know what, I can't do this anymore, or I have to eliminate some particular kind of relationship from my life, some working relationship, something like that. It's not a bad time for there to be a purgation or elimination, again, of things that aren't working, especially around relationships or anything that we feel is really ugly, dark, heavy, that is toxic. But we also got to be careful being puritanical and overly judgmental. We have such a cancel culture. I read that somewhere recently. I thought that was interesting phrase. Cancel meaning like, oh, there's some imperfection in you. Well, I never want to see you again, or I never want to hear from this person again, or I cancel anything good that they've ever done in their life. So we have to be really careful of that, because of course we can become hypocrites really quickly, right? When we are quick to want to eliminate the darkness from someone else or to judge it or call it out, but we aren't in the practice of doing that for ourselves. I think when we are in the practice of doing that for ourselves, when we're in the practice of really looking at our own darkness and seeking to purify and keep our hearts clean and our minds clean and things like that, that we recognize how much grace and forgiveness it takes to do that upkeep. You know, when I think about my daily mantra meditation practice, every day in my mantra meditation practice, it's like repolishing the same window, the same mirror of the mind, so that the self, the real self, can be seen just a little bit more clearly. And boy, within 24 hours, you know, from evening to morning, the things that can show up all over again are there. And so if we're at all keeping up with the internal work of healing and clearing and trying to maintain open-heartedness, we know how difficult it is. We know that it's not a joke, and we know that the only way of doing that personal upkeep is by being really merciful and forgiving of ourselves. I believe that the more one takes the spiritual life consistently over a long period of time with devotion in their heart, the more that grace and mercy and forgiveness are a natural byproduct, because you have to develop those capabilities to be able. If you didn't have them, you'd just quit, because it's too hard to go on trying to really trying to do the work of a spiritual practice if you don't have that attitude toward yourself. So what to speak of other people, right, who may not have a spiritual practice, or who may not be doing that work, or who may not have those resources for one reason or another, who may not be in a position that is as easy as us. We don't know where people come from most of the time in this lifetime, what to speak of past lifetimes. So mercy and forgiveness are so important, especially during a Venus-Pluto transit with Venus in Mars's sign. Aggression and self-righteousness and anger and resentment, most of which are probably justified. You know, in other words, we might have really good reasons to be angry or upset with someone or something, and yet the really difficult work is to look inward and think about the things that we think about, the things that we fantasize about, the things that we say or do that we know are not always great, that are selfish or that are hurtful or that are jealous or envious or bitter, to really address that level of our heart and refuse the urge to go out and try to cancel, clear anything or anyone that doesn't pass our purity test, and point that back inward toward ourselves. And if we do that regularly, we'll realize what kind of forgiveness we're really in need of, and that carries over to other people, obviously. So that's a simple lesson. It actually came up in the I Ching reading I was doing for this Venus-Pluto square this morning as well. It was a lot about forgiveness and mercy, and just being careful, because Venus in Aries square Pluto can very much be about, you know, the crimes and misdemeanors of the heart. You know, the things that we, you know, I was reading a book recently by Thich Nhat Hanh about anger, and one of the things that you know, I was thinking about, you know, I was thinking about the roots of my own anger and what makes me angry whenever I get angry. And it's usually, as Thich Nhat Hanh points out, as a Vietnamese monk Buddhist, he points out that, you know, anger comes from a feeling of there being injustice. That's not fair. That wasn't right. That was wrong. And so usually the first level of anger is, on some level, we have to validate it. We have to recognize, like, oh yeah, something that was bad happened, or that was really wrong, and it made me mad. And so validating, or even just stating, like, to yourself, like, something that I've been working on since reading this book has just been, when I get upset, usually, you know, it's with my kids, or, you know, it's like some chaos that I can't control or something like that, or, you know, whatever. Stuff dealing with, you know, people in the world every day is not easy for all of us. So at any rate, so the thing to do has been to, you know, go into a different room by myself and just say, I'm angry because of this, and just kind of state, like, try to be as logical and clear about the simple thing that angered me. Usually it's a very simple thing, and then I can kind of analyze it and go, okay, Is this me just being frustrated and irritable? And if so, maybe it's because I didn't get enough sleep, or I didn't eat a nice lunch, or maybe I ate too many sweets or something like that, and so my blood sugar is going, and I'm just more irritable because my body's stressed. Sometimes you can just identify, like, is this a rational thing or not? A lot of the times it is, right? It's actually something happened that wasn't right. And then the next step, which I think can really help, is to say, do I need to be the administrator of justice in this case? And I don't mean that any of us are really ever the administrators of justice, but in other words, like, if I ask that question, usually what happens is I kind of go, I'll pass. Like, if I really logically just say, hey, self, would you like to go and be the judge and jury for this person or this situation or whatever? And usually the answer is no. There are some situations that come up where maybe something does need to be said, or some kind of, I need to confront something. But a lot of the times the answer is no. And then I ask a follow-up question, which is, can I trust that, God, the universe, that person, or the person's soul, that justice will take its own course, that a person will learn or grow in whatever way they need to eventually, and that I'm not in charge of making that happen for them. And a lot of the times the answer is, yeah, that's going to be the best case. Not always. I know some people are going to hear this and be like, no, we have to, nothing will change if we don't do something. And excuse me, there's certainly a time for fighting. But Venus square Pluto, Venus in Aries with the exalted Mars, we can go over the top thinking, this is I need to do something. I need to correct something. I need to be the punisher, so to speak. And we can do that through shame or guilt or, anger, or all sorts of things that oftentimes people are not going to end up receiving a whole lot through. It's not going to be the most constructive way to confront people. And oftentimes, if we're honest, when we really examine our anger, there are other things that exist within layers of our anger. It's not just one pure reason. It's not just, well, I'm mad because this happened. For example, if I'm honest, sometimes I think something unjust is being said or done. I might also envy someone on some level. For example, one thing that I've had to do for myself as a social media person over the years is, I pay attention to what people say and write about astrology online. And when I hear that someone is saying something about astrology that I think is untrue or unjust or unfair or misleading people or something like that, it's easy to get frustrated, to get mad. And gradually, what I've been learning to do for myself is to, play that same little game with myself and just go like, why are you mad? And then, sometimes it's mixed. It's like, well, I don't like that they have such a big following and that I don't like what they say. So there's envy tinged with maybe some legitimate reason that I have for not liking what someone's saying. It's not easy to be honest with ourselves about envy, jealousy, bitterness, selfishness, vanity. It's just not easy to do that because somewhere along the lines, we've picked up this idea that it's all or nothing. You either have a good intention or a bad intention. You're either a good person or a bad person. And that leads to either heroes or villains. And most of us are somewhere in the middle, So it really helps when Venus is square to Pluto with this kind of martial energy in the air, especially within our relationships and with the objects of our desire and the objects of our repulsion, to really look carefully at the way that things are mixed together. Yeah, I don't like what this person said, but I might have some jealousies or some envy, or I might be comparing myself to them in some ways, or I might wish that I had something that they have, or, like there can be some way in which we can see the mixedness of our response, of our frustration or our anger. And that can also just tone down the temptation to strike out with a kind of self-righteousness that will entangle us and likely lead to more suffering and probably not a whole lot of growth with whoever or whatever it is that we're trying to address. Now, all of this is again because Venus square to Pluto often comes with this feeling of needing to remove, eliminate, address, confront some kind of catharsis in our relationships. And so it seems appropriate to me that we would reflect with this aspect on, the way that we can see ourselves implicated within the frustration. The reason that we do that is not to, like some people will say, this just blames the victim, right? For it's like someone does me wrong, and I'm like, well, let me look for what I did wrong and just bring it back to myself. And, I don't want to, whatever. People will be like, you know what, if you have that mentality all the time, justice is never going to get served. That's actually not the point that I'm making at all. For example, let's say that, there's things that are going to happen to people where there are very clear victims and very clear aggressors. And sometimes it is more black and white. But on the everyday level of our more petty and mundane conflicts that we have with people, I'm talking about the everyday stuff of life, not the kind of stuff where you get, jumped in an alley, and you might need to like sue someone, or, what I mean? Like, you get someone, whatever harms you in a really big way, and you don't take some action, that you may not actually be helping them karmically by, so turning the other cheek is not, I'm not talking about turning the other cheek in a way that is completely blind to the more black and white situations that victims and aggressors exist in sometimes. But I'm talking about the more everyday sphere of a Venus-Pluto transit, which often culminates with things that are more petty, right? So in that case, the reason that it's so good to find ourselves, find the mixed levels of our intentions, of our anxieties, of our frustrations and angers and so forth, is because when we have, even if we need to confront someone, when we have had to look at ourselves very carefully, and we've had to be graceful and merciful and honest, and we've been humbled by recognizing the degree of our own self-interest or some tinge of selfishness or jealousy or bitterness within our complaint or feeling of being wronged or something like that. Two things happen. One, if we need to let it go, if it's better to let it go, it's going to be easier to do so rather than reacting and creating a really unnecessary conflict that is in many ways hypocritical. But on the other hand, if we do need to confront someone, then by checking in and doing inventory on the motivations that we have, the real reasons, the multiple reasons that we have for being upset, then we know we can come from a space of compassion, kindness, and we've already sort of stepped halfway when we need to say or do or confront something. So that's not an easy thing to do. And anger loves speed. Anger loves speed. And the truth is that if you look at great martial artists from all over the world, all different kinds of martial arts, Mars being martial, you see that martial arts is a discipline, and it's like there's a book actually called The Art of War. It's a famous treatise on the kind of the most intelligent way to fight. And a lot of the times I'm not any martial artist or anything, but just from what I've read and what I've understood about martial arts, a good friend of mine is a martial artist. But anyway, what I've learned is that, it takes a lot of patience and discipline, and to know when, you can't be drawn into a reaction. It actually shows a lack of control and a lack of strength to react, which opponents can take advantage of very easily. And so if we want some progress to be made in terms of the complaints and injustices that we feel, we have to try to step out of the cancel, clear, black and white, you're wrong, I'm right kind of thinking, even if we feel that something is really at stake in the situation. We have to try to recognize our own hypocrisy, our own implication, as much as we can, honestly, and find the grace and mercy in doing that as a process. And then we move in and we can approach someone with care and concern for that person as a being, recognizing that this issue that I have is not the same as the soul that I'm talking to. Most of the time, what happens in our conflicts is that when a person feels like, I have a complaint or I have a problem because you did something that I didn't like, or whatever, then the person feels attacked. And as soon as they feel attacked, then they go on the defensive. So helping when we have identified ourselves within the issue and found some mercy and grace for ourselves, then when we approach the person, we can care for them and sort of make the issue something that's standing between us as an object that we're both looking at, not as one soul competing for a game of moral one-upmanship or spiritual one-upmanship or whatever, which often just gets us nowhere. And then we don't feel like, even if we've won, it's not really it's a hollow victory. If we've won but we've had to we've confused a spirit soul with an issue that we have with them, we've only perpetuated the karma, which will come back to us again later. So that is what I've got for today. I hope that you enjoyed listening to this. Remember that Venus square Pluto is very intense and transformative for relationships of all kinds. It's, don't be surprised if you see that element of ugliness, the shadow, the deep, difficult stuff existing in some space in your life, either in the environment or again in your relationships, that needs addressing. And I hope what came across today was just that there is it's so much easier to address these things when we have done some inner self-reflection first. We find our own implication, our own shadows. It's then easier to address things with others or in the environment with greater care and grace and forgiveness. And usually we can make changes in a much healthier way when we're doing that. So I'd love to hear your stories and hear how things are going. Please share them in the comments section. And we will be back because we've got a couple of other transits to talk about coming up, plus my overview for March and my horoscopes for the month of March as well. All right, take it easy, everyone. Bye.